Here in person, and
Oh, perfect. All right, well then, it looks like we're ready to roll. So let's call to order the Planning Commission meeting for April 4th, 2022. And let's start by asking if there, we do have a change to our agenda. So please make note of that, everyone who's attending the meeting. Am I right on that? That's the item A.
That's just where we used to have a discussion item there about how to add items. It's now
Yeah.
been included as an attachment.
Fair enough. So do we have any, is there anyone on Zoom who wants to add anything to our agenda this afternoon? If not, then let's proceed to 2 public comments. Do we have anyone on CNET or in person that has any, that would like to address anything that is not on this afternoon's agenda? Very good. Then let's proceed to item 3, and which is the regulations to permit accessory dwelling units, referred to as ADUs. Who would like to give us the synopsis on that?
That would be me.
Thank you, Nicole.
Sure. So just to sort of remind everybody, we have been talking at the last few meetings about accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and it's coming from a recommendation out of the 2021 Patton Township Housing Task Force report that was then delegated to the Planning Commission to look into further by the board back in October. So tonight we're going to try to focus on a few main things as we work through these regulations. We're going to try to sort of take this piece by piece in our meetings. So tonight we're going to look at definition again, eligibility, quantity, occupancy and use, and size. And one of the attachments, 3.2, is sort of the outline that was in the body of our last agenda to kind of help us track our progress as we work through the different elements to the regulations. And as most of you will know, I think, Brian, you weren't here, but everybody else, I think, that's in attendance from the Planning Commission, the conversation was really focused on a lot of rental unit discussion. So we went ahead and asked Mr. Walt Schneider, who is the director of the Center Region Code Agency, to join us this evening. So I want to first give him the floor so he can have a discussion with you all and you can get some of your questions answered. And we did provide the rental packet information as the last attachment with this item in the agenda. So I'm not sure if staff or the Planning Commission wants to say anything else, or if Walt, you just sort of want to jump in there. I'm not sure how we want to proceed with
Well, why don't you take the floor and enlighten us? You're on mute.
Yep, I'd be happy to. Sorry, just caught the corner of the keyboard. So if they are constructed, they are going to be constructed under the International Residential Code. There is no true definition of efficiency in the actual residential code. So as you look at putting these together, a lot of it's going to depend on square footages as they try and figure out what the layout is going to be and how you're going to configure the space. That said, if they would build them as a single bedroom or a multi-bedroom type dwelling unit, the minimum bedroom size is 70 square feet. If the goal here is to build something that would then be rented, then we come under the Center Region Building Safety and Property Maintenance Code, which is how your rental permit is issued. And that has square footage limitations in it with regard to the number of occupants. So if we're looking at habitable square footage, then what we're looking at is a minimum of 50 square feet. If you're doing a 1-bedroom unit, for example, the combination of the living room, dining room, and kitchen need to give a minimum of 50 square feet for one occupant, another 50 square feet for a second occupant if you're going to have two occupants, and so on. Bedroom size for one occupant is 70 square feet. If you're going to put two people in that bedroom, it's 100 square feet.
Nicole, did you have your hand up for a reason? No problem.
Did you mean me?
Yeah, I'm showing that your hand's up. That's no problem. I didn't,
Okay, sorry.
no problem. I'm sorry, Walter, go ahead.
No, that's okay. No apologies. If you do build an efficiency unit to get a rental housing permit currently, you need for that combination area, which is your kitchen, dining, living, bedroom, because it's an efficiency, 220 square feet for one occupant. And if you have, for two occupants, it's 220 square feet. If we're headed for three occupants, that's 320 square feet. So that's where we start getting into square footages. And it all depends on configuration. So it's kind of tough to give you exact numbers because it really is up to the individual in some respects on how to configure space. In the rental housing side of things, we also won't measure a room unless there's a minimum of 7 feet in that dimension. So you can't count square footage that's 3 feet wide and 15 feet long, for example, as habitable space. It's just not something somebody could use.
Got it. Anything more, Walter, you wanted to share?
No, I mean, I'm here more to answer questions than I am from a presentation standpoint as you're working through and looking at what would make sense for Patton Township.
So Planning Commission, fellow Planning Commission members, was there any discussion about ADUs in terms of being within the building envelope as opposed to building them outside of the building envelope? Had we talked about that yet? Because there's a huge difference.
We did.
In other words, are we, as the Planning Commission, are we trying to create spaces within the houses that are already built? Are we trying to talk about a separate structure altogether? Has that conversation been narrowed down, or at this point, are we still
that
talking
conversation
about
has
all
not
of
been
that?
narrowed down. That conversation hasn't been narrowed down.
Very good. Because that's kind of where the conversation will need to evolve to. Do we all agree with that?
Yeah. So I think they had explained everything and but we didn't really talk about that in depth at all. Everything was very, just kind of a presentation last week. But I think we do need to talk about that is this the right time or?
I'd recommend we stay on the agenda for right now
Yeah.
and work
Yeah,
through what we have on
wasn't
the
exactly one of the
agenda.
ones.
We can have that discussion at a later, next meeting, probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fair enough. So the definition, do we want to get on to the definition of an ADU?
We can. I just wanted to make sure everybody had their concerns addressed since Walt was kind enough to join us tonight. But if you guys are pretty satisfied with the discussion we had a couple weeks ago and with his explanation for now, we might be able to free him for the evening if he would prefer.
I'm fine to hang out and I've got work that I'm doing, so I can answer questions if you have them. But that way, if into your discussion, if you do have a question, I'm here.
Great. Appreciate that, Walt.
I have some quick questions for Walt, since we have him, and before he gets tied up with actually doing work. Hey, Walt, so when we're talking, you covered the square footage, and it was 70 for a bedroom, It's 100 for a bedroom for 2 people. And and you also covered the other living areas that are needed. How does that work together if we're dealing with something, for example, like a studio, a traditional studio apartment or something along those lines?
So an efficiency apartment from our standpoint, so now I've got combined area where those are together. If you are going to try and have 2 occupants, then for the rental side of things, we need a minimum of 220 square feet. That's the kitchen, dining, and basically your bedroom area. So kitchen, dining, living, bedroom, not including the bathroom. We need 220 square feet, and it's clear floor area. So that doesn't include the counters, doesn't include the cabinets. We need that as far as the square footage. So
Okay, so that's okay.
you can have furniture in it, you just can't have built-ins in it. If we want to add a third person, that gets up to 320.
Okay. For a rental, something that's being rented, whether it's detached or connected to the home, is there anything that specifically must be in the home in Center Region codes for habitability purposes, such as stove or anything along those lines? Can you go through what's required?
Yeah, I need to have, for a dwelling unit, let me pull it up so I make sure I've got all the pieces, but basically I need obviously a bathroom. I need to be able to cook, and so that's the other piece along with then the square footages.
Okay. Let's start at the bathroom. What do you need in the bathroom?
Need a toilet, a sink, and a shower at a minimum.
Shower. Okay. So what would typically be called a 2.5 bath?
A 3/4 bath.
Okay. 2.5 bath. I'm saying 2.5 baths, but yeah, a 3/4 bath. Is there any particular size that bathroom has to be under our codes?
When you look at it, you've got to be able, and I'll be honest, I don't have it right in front of me, but I believe, I'm shooting from the hip here, I believe the minimum shower size wind up being about 30 by 30. And then everything else really is a function of the other fixtures and how you configure them. I believe the toilet's got a 21-inch, and I'm in the middle of pulling up the IRC, because if we built it today, it would be based on the IRC. Give me 2 seconds here and I'll have that up.
Because I'm just sort of imagining, in my lawyer brain here, the most, asinine and possible way to skirt everything. So I'm trying to figure out how to make this as small as possible so that we understand what as small as humanly possible is going to be. So that way we can work from there and make things broader. Because if you're not trying to break it, then you're not taking it apart.
I get it. I get it completely. So I am getting into the fixture pieces here for how tight we can get.
So for example, can we make a super efficiency like some of the crazy things that you see in Japan type things to pop in,
Yeah. Shower components shall not have less than 900 square inches of interior cross-sectional area and shall not be less than 30-inch minimum dimension from the finished interior dimension of the shower compartment, exclusive of the valves, shower heads, those kinds of things. So 30 by 30 is as small as you're going to get as a shower itself.
So there's a, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is how I just heard it. So there's a 30-inch dimension of depth, and then on top of that, there is also a area of a square cubic area or a square area that also has to be done for that as well.
Correct. So
Okay.
what they try and do is, to be honest, so for example, they'll tell you 900 square inches, and I'm guessing that went into the code first at some point. and then somebody tried to make it 20 inches wide and real long. So they said, hey, it's not practical to have anything less than 30 inches. So effectively, the 30 by 30 got you where you needed to be.
So Walter,
Okay.
what do you think, if we wanted to build a very small bathroom to accommodate the three things, toilet, sink, and shower, are we looking at what, a bathroom that's a minimum of how much square footage?
I mean, it is, you can effectively do a bath, I mean, I've seen them effectively, if you're trying to do 3 foot past the fixtures and you put them all on one side, you've got roughly 30 plus a little bit for a, for the wall thickness, for example. Roughly, you know, when you think about a small, a very small vanity, you can probably get away with 2 feet on a vanity for a sink. And then about another 2 foot for a toilet if you could go right past all of them. So if you put all that in one line, call it 2.5, really about 6.5 feet on that side and about 3 feet wide beyond those units at roughly 30 inches, you know, again, you're at about 6.5 by 5.5. So, I mean, you can get really tight. Now, that said, is that really something that you'd ever want somebody using? And that's very long and thin.
Right.
I have a question. Don't we have zoning or building restrictions on sizes of bathrooms in Patton Township? What's the minimum in Patton Township?
There's no real minimum size for the bathroom itself. It's all based on, you got to fit the shower and you have to have so much room around the shower. You have to have the shower that's so big. You have to have a toilet and you have to have so much room around the toilet. And you have to have a sink and you have to have so much room around the sink. So,
And clearance for doors?
and clear for doors, yeah. So I think, you know, what Walt said, you know, you could probably do something in 40 square feet, or it's gonna be that or probably larger.
Okay.
I mean, you might be able to get a few square feet smaller, but, you know,
So
say
if you're
35
talking-
or 40 square feet for the absolute minimum for a bathroom.
So 70 is the minimum for the bedroom.
Well, just remember the
40 for the-
220 number. Most of these are gonna be rental units. So they have to meet 2 different codes. There's the building code and then there's the rental code. And they're 2 different codes. And for our purposes, I think let's focus on rentals.
Oh, okay.
So it's for an efficiency or a studio, it's 220 square feet plus the bathroom
So
as a minimum
260,
size
270.
for occupancy by 2 people.
Okay.
So that'd be-
And keep in mind that 220 is net clear, so that doesn't include the run of cabinets where the sink, your stove, your kitchen cabinets are. So you got a little bit more square footage to add to that too.
So
Do we require-
probably if we say like 300 square feet is probably the minimum for a 2-person single.
And then add your bathroom to it. So you're probably 350-ish is about as tight as you're gonna get.
Okay, so Walt said 350.
Okay.
Why don't you wait until
And
the
right
planning
now-
commission's done, yeah.
Can anyone enlighten us? So college is, what is their minimum square
Same-
footage?
Same numbers.
Nicole,
This is
does College Township have a minimum square feet for EDUs? Or are there any other municipalities around here?
Got a question
I
for
haven't-
you, or for Walt, I didn't hear you.
Is it maximum, right?
Yeah, some of the other municipalities regulate that they can't be any larger than 1,000 square feet.
So the smallest is going to be regulated basically by the rental code and the combination of the rental code and the building code.
Right.
Now we have one person, a resident in the audience with us. He's got a question. Can we have him ask now, Brian?
Yeah.
Come up
Please,
to the
proceed.
podium, Barry, and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, my name's Barry Feinberg. Hey, Walt, how do you
Yes.
handle ADA requirements in a space so small? How do you handle access, egress, the ability to get within the doorways with the space
Under the-
that you're talking about? Will that fall in your wheelhouse?
So under the residential construction requirements in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, so when we're talking about single-family homes, basically 1 and 2 family dwellings, there are no requirements that the unit has to meet the accessibility requirements. Those kick in when we get into the commercial code. Then we get into accessibility requirements and get into type B units and type A units and so on, depending on the number of units in the building and those kinds of things. But in the single-family home code, there's nothing in place that requires them to be accessible or visitable.
But we're taking a single-family home and talking about dividing it into a multifamily dwelling that could be used for a rental unit. That doesn't sound like a residential unit to me.
Under the code, it still is until we hit 4. So until we start really chopping this thing up and making it an apartment building, having one additional unit in the home doesn't trigger it. I am not saying I agree or disagree with that. It just doesn't under the current regulations.
Couple other questions, if I may, be brief. If somebody decides to go down this path and changes their single-family home to a multifamily dwelling, will they have to adhere to fire codes such as firewalls, fire doors, sprinkler systems, things of that nature?
Again, unless we get into something that is really jumping past 2 dwelling units while we're still in 2 dwelling units, we're still okay. Once we get past 2 dwelling units, if it's a townhouse, then you'd get into sprinklers. Or if we get into the commercial side, yes. But as long as we're staying in that 2 dwelling units, it stays into the International Residential Code and it does not trigger it.
Okay. What about utilities? Will they have to have separate, if the house has gas available, electric available, will they have to have their own utilities, sewer, water, gas?
From an electric standpoint, they need to have access to their shutoffs and so on. But no, it is possible, and that would be a situation where they would have to work with, the owner of the house would have to figure out how they're breaking up the utility bill, for example. We've got apartment complexes in town that they've got multiple units all on one electrical feed, and they average the bill and share the bill. But that's really up to the owners. We get into some individual shutoff requirements, but those can be handled easily, even on a single service, for example.
I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse, but what about parking? Is there any codes that require off-street parking? And if so, how do you handle pervious versus impervious materials, percentage of the lot, the building property, all those kinds of things?
That'd be a Patton Township question.
Doug, do you want to take that?
Well, those are going to be zoning issues that we'll probably be talking about a little further down the road as part of this process.
Okay.
So I think currently right now for a single-family dwelling, it's required 2 parking spots. So that the parking equation will have to evolve. Any other questions?
Is this targeting R2 again?
That hasn't been decided yet.
Okay, because R2 is primarily Park Forest, that's why I asked that question. And I'm just wondering if this is a recycling of the last go-around with just a different name to,
It's a different concept than duplexes. It's a smaller, ADUs are typically, they're accessory because they're accessory to the primary use. So they're typically smaller than the primary dwelling. So and the township has the ability to place other restrictions on these accessory units if we want to.
will the overwatch of what's going on be under zoning or code, or how will that be handled? As an example, how do you know how many people will be in each rental unit? I know that rental units are required, that type of thing.
Yeah, every rental unit has an occupancy limit.
Based on what?
Mr. Schneider Walt was talking about. A lot of it's based on the size of the unit. So, they're going to be restricted to 1 or 2 occupants, or maybe 3. Part of some of the conditions that we could possibly put on this is limit occupancy to no more than 2 people or no more than 3 people or something like that.
Have any talk been, or anything been decided yet on owner occupancy?
No, Barry, none
Not at all?
Yeah, we haven't had those discussions yet, so those are all discussions that are coming down the road.
Okay.
I just want to go on record to say that this is, no decisions have been made. We are in the process of exploring this, so nothing has been decided. And in fact, I'm very appreciative that you're participating in the meeting, and we would encourage you to, the panel's getting together frequently. And so we're looking for more community input at all times, but no decisions have been made.
My only concern is that I found out, because I get emails with agendas. I've asked for that, and Nicole has been gracious enough to send me those emails, and this particular initiative came up again. It doesn't seem like very many people within my community, my residential area, even know about this initiative being brought up again. And it's concerning that it's not well publicized so that people can get into a discussion or participate in any way in the early stages. I find that once these things get down the road pretty far, it's very difficult to backpedal and make changes. Decisions have been made, and once it gets to perhaps a place where it becomes a decision by the Board of Supervisors, the likelihood of people getting involved, residents getting involved, and getting their input is diminished pretty greatly. I would suggest that if this goes down the path, as was done last time, a survey be sent out to the residents that are impacted. I'm not talking about a Center County email. I'm talking about residents that are primarily impacted in those residential areas, to get their input, because I don't know if anybody or everybody was on board at that time, a year and a half ago. If I remember, the overwhelming response was not for it. I mean, if I remember correct, seeing the numbers, it was an onslaught not to move forward with the duplexes. To me and to some of the folks that I've talked to, this is just a rebranding and a recycling of that same idea. No matter how you cut it, it's not much different than taking a single-family dwelling and chopping it up into a multifamily unit. The only difference is, as Walt was gracious enough to enlighten me on, is that there's really no restrictions when it comes to requirements for fire safety. If you look at any building that's used as a rental, as a commercial operation. They have to have firewalls that have to be fire rated. They have to have fire doors. They have to have egress available. There's all types of things that come into play. And it doesn't sound like any of that is being considered here. To me, that sounds like a real recipe for disaster in the fact, if in fact some catastrophic event happens.
A couple things. One is, all of those things will be considered. So I just want to be sensitive that you're not referring to decisions that have been made, because decisions have not been made. We are in the information gathering of this, and we welcome public support. And then we have Bill Barnett, we're fortunate enough that he actually is on Alpha, to have him on the Planning Commission. So, please don't refer to decisions that have been made, because that's just not accurate. We have these meetings for community input.
Again, I do appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to voice my opinion.
Mr.
I
Chairman?
know that it may be in
Yeah.
your perception, it's been well publicized. I believe that's what you said. I had a little hard time hearing that, but I find it interesting that maybe 3 or 4 people within the community that I've talked to have even heard about this thing coming up again. So I'm not sure how you publicize it.
Jim, I'm going to get to you in 1 second. So, Mr. Payne, do you want to take the floor?
Listen, I don't want to take up the committee's time talking about this. I know you folks have work to do. But I would suggest
would like to
that
say
perhaps that
something.
you figure out a way to publicize this more so that you can get residential input. Because if you go down this path and you get the kind of response you got last time, it's going to get really ugly.
Okay, listen, before, I just need you to put you on pause for 1 minute. And the reason why is Mr. Payne would like to comment, and then after him, we've got Bill Barnett. So just bear with us. Go ahead, Mr. Payne.
Thank you. As far as the fire safety stuff, if we look at these ADUs as rentals or potential rentals, there are some fire safety things in the rental requirements, such as the smoke alarms and stuff like that. And there has to be 2 egresses. So if somebody builds something in a basement, there has to be 2 egresses out of the basement. So there's a lot of things to look at.
Can we make sure, before you, please know that the township will have all the, if what you're reading, we need to get you this information. So we don't want a lot of false narratives occurring. So it's important to everyone on the Planning Commission that you, at least that you're informed, so that you are just better informed. Anything else, Mr. Payne?
That's it for the moment.
Mr. Barnett?
So just really quick for Nicole. Nicole, these planning work session agendas are publicized, are they not? Either Nicole.
Yes, they're scheduled, and I believe the schedule for the meetings are publicized as required by the MPC at the beginning of the year. So there's a standing schedule for these meetings.
All right, and are the contents of these Planning Commission sessions available on the website, available for everybody to get a hold of?
Yes.
Okay. So, and we are in compliance with, and this one's more for Doug or Nicole. Or Nicole, sorry. So we are in compliance with the requirements of the state of Pennsylvania on advertising what is going on with these planning sessions.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for those questions. Any more questions, Mr. Burnett?
I was just going to make a comment also on the firefighting before Walt does, but you know what? I think I'm going to let Walt go first, and then I will yield my time to him, and then I will make comments as a firefighter versus somebody that's doing all the planning and making sure that we're safe when we go into the burning building.
Very good. Thank you. And Walt, please proceed.
Sure. I just wanted to when the question was asked if they were going to have firewalls and so on, firewalls have very distinct requirements and very distinct definitions. There are fire separations between the units, and egress is verified and maintained. These, like every other rental, then would be inspected on a regular basis. Occupancy is governed through the Center Region Building Safety and Property Maintenance Code. It does include the fire safety features that are common throughout the rental units that are single-family homes and so on. When I was referring to the fact that, no, this will not generate sprinklers, for example, again, there are certain triggers in the code that this will not trigger. But these will have the same level of fire safety as what all the other rental units we've been dealing with that are built in the single-family home environment.
Thank you. Any more questions, sir?
Does it for me. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming, and we do appreciate all community input. So for people who are uninformed, please go to the meetings or get online at the web. Mr. Burnett, please proceed.
So just a quick couple of follow-up questions for Walt. Walt, would you like to walk us through residential life safety sprinkler systems and what triggers and what requires it? And try to keep it down to 5 minutes, because I know we can talk for hours about sprinklers.
Well, hang on, but what's the point? Why are we going down that road?
Well, first off, I think the Planning Commission needs to understand how the sprinkler systems work and what they do and don't do in situations, and what a residential life safety sprinkler system really is entailed to do. I think a lot of people sort of have a misconception that sprinkler pops and fires out.
Yeah,
And we're lucky that happens.
Yeah, the residential sprinklers are truly designed to mitigate the fire to the point of keeping the fire in check as best it can. Not all spaces are sprinklered. It is designed to allow the building occupants and afford them time to get out of the building and to keep the fire from achieving a point which we call flashover. Depending on if it's connected to a public utility or not, it's required to flow for a minimum of 10 minutes, allowing the fire department time to respond and have them actually make intervention in the fire. So this is much different than a full-blown commercial sprinkler system that you would find, for example, in an apartment building. They are triggered. They are always an option for a homeowner to put in place, but they are triggered when we get into a townhouse situation. But they're not triggered in 1 and 2 family dwellings unless the owner at this point wants them to be. The state law requires us to get somebody to sign off on them declining them when the building is initially constructed, but there's not a requirement necessarily when they do the renovation.
Thank you. Okay. I would like to proceed with a conversation on the definition of accessory dwelling units. Who would like to lead us on that?
I will do that.
Thank you, Nicole.
All right, so the next thing that we would like to discuss with you. So we talked at the last meeting about crafting a specific definition for an accessory dwelling unit. At this point, given where we're at with the conversation and trying to build the regulations, I think it would be better if we kind of paused that conversation and maybe circled back to it once we get some of these other questions answered. We get through a little bit more of how we might want to regulate these. And in the Patton Township zoning code, we do define what a dwelling unit is, and we do define what an accessory use is. So we might even come to the decision that we need to have a separate standalone definition for an accessory dwelling unit. So at this point, I think we should kind of put that on hold and come back to that later as we work through things.
Nicole, I agree. Quick question: does the nearby municipalities that do have accessory dwelling units, I presume they have a separate definition?
Some do. I'm trying to think back to the chart that I had in the last Jenna, they all do not. So it's some do, some don't.
Those that do, can you just enlighten us our next meeting as to those that have it, why do they have it and how is it different?
Yeah, I can look into that. I know College Township does, because we looked at theirs specifically, but thought it was that we might want to be a little bit more specific than what they had.
Yeah.
And then Ferguson Township has one, but it's only for their one specific zoning district, because they allow them in more than one zoning district, but the definition is only in the part of the code for the one zoning district. So I can get in touch with the staff of both of those municipalities and try to get a little more information on their definitions.
Thank you.
All right. So, does anybody else want to talk about that real quick, or should we just keep going?
Proceed, please. Thank you.
Sure. So the next thing that we should look at with this regulation, we've kind of talked about it a little bit in the beginning of our meeting here, but talking about occupancy limits and owner occupancy requirements. So Mr. Erickson noted in our last meeting that we could take kind of an excerpt from one of the local neighborhoods and take 100 homes and see how they're broken down. So you have in your agenda, there are 99 properties that were looked at, and there's an attached map that shows just what properties were looked at. They're not designated, they're not broken down as how the chart is written, but it just shows you what properties were looked at for this. So there's kind of a breakdown of those 99 properties, that 79 of them are owner occupied with no rental permit. And kind of the breakdown from there. If you look, I think the other important number, there are 12 of them that have a rental permit that are not owner occupied, and then there are 6 of them that are not owner occupied but that also do not have a rental permit. So it's kind of a smaller percentage of that segment that has a rental permit already attached to it.
Perfect.
This was really helpful.
Good. Because I think part of what we're kind of trying to drive at with this is, if we're going to require owner occupancy, which it did seem that that's how the Planning Commission was leaning at our last meeting, that we would want the owner to live on site, that if there's already a rental permit with a single family dwelling, that essentially that property would kind of be no longer eligible for the second unit unless the property owner was going to move back and then create the second unit and live on site. So it was kind of a way to show, to lead into our conversation about where we might want to consider allowing the accessory unit. And then the other thing I wanted to point out, as Walt kind of walked us through size limitations with units and how that would limit occupancy, I think we just need to be careful with stating in our code beyond our own definition of family, because we could run into issues with the Fair Housing Act and trying to decide who can live where. So that was just kind of the only other thing I wanted to call attention to as we talk about occupancy limits and occupancy requirements.
Very good. Doug, do I see your hand up on Zoom?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Nicole.
That's all right.
You actually have mine now,
Since
but
I still have a question.
Sorry.
Bill,
I just
go ahead.
want to reiterate, do not mess with the family definition. We don't want to go there.
We don't
So
want to go there.
I'm very happy that Nicole said
In
that.
agreement.
Yeah.
Do we want to go to eligibility?
Okay, well, hold on, let's.
All right.
Sure. So the discussion question that we kind of posed, I just want to make sure that we're covering that. So I don't know at this point if we want to, I leave it up to the Planning Commission. If we want to explicitly state that there has to be the owner that lives on site. Is that something you guys are comfortable talking about now, or do we want to also hold on that until later?
I think we should talk
I
about that
think it's
now.
worthy of talking about it now.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm of the opinion that we start out with baby steps, and the baby step would be to have it owner occupied.
Agree.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree, Brian.
So if we're all in agreement on that, does anyone disagree with that thought process? That was easy. Okay.
All right. We will move on. Bill, did you have a question or did you just not put your hand down?
Bill, your hand's up. Do you have a question?
I see that my hand's up. I really didn't. I'm on the fence about starting with the baby step of owner occupied versus not, because I do very much agree with the individual that spoke in front of us earlier, that as we get tied into things, it's going to be very hard to change it. I do like the idea of owner occupied, and you know, it fits on what I always have seen these things as being done for, as more of being done for like in-law apartment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the mother-in-law apartment. But I'm not sure if I'm ready, based on everything that we've discussion-wise, to just settle that immediately. So I mean, that's only my feeling right there. But I do support, at least at this time, if the majority of the board wishes to move forward, I'm happy to plant my flag and say I protest, because I think we need to discuss it more. But at the same time, I'm not going to push it.
Well, I guess my question/compromise thought would be, we didn't really designate which unit has to be owner occupied. So at this point, there still would be that, well, I mean, it's all still flexible technically, but if we don't specify which unit has to be owner occupied, that still gives some sort of flexibility, that if it's a elderly couple that has a 3-bedroom home that doesn't need the 3-bedroom home, so they're going to downsize into the second unit themselves and then use their main house for other family or rent it. So there's still a little bit of flexibility, but with that sort of reassurance to the community that it's not going to become a absentee landlord situation that I think was part of the loud voices that we heard when we were talking duplexes back in August of 2020, as there was a lot of concern around what the property would become in the neighborhood if it was a rental property, if they were both rental properties. So that would be kind of my thoughts on maybe sort of like a compromise situation where you're still going to require the owner to live on site, but not specify which unit the owner has to live in. I don't know what you think of that idea.
I agree with you, but I think that you know, we are going to be needing to make baby steps in terms of these decisions, and I think as the planning commission, based on tonight's input, that we as a commission are comfortable saying that it would be only owner occupied, not defining which part would be that the owner would remain in.
I think we need more input from the community on that, because we've had one person speak to us, and I know that the floodgates will be opened from, now that I've said that, from the contingent that was in front of us before, when the previous discussion, that was the townhomes, came up. So I think more input is rather needed, but again, you know, if the board wants to move forward and make it owner occupied, the other question I would have, at least so that I feel comfortable in not protesting any further, is, Doug, are we allowed to require where a person, can we require somebody must be in the Patton Township for a rental license? Like the owner of the property renting must live in Patton Township.
Nicole, I'll get right to you.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Bill. My first instinct is to say no. I mean, we can clearly, in this case, when we're talking about ADUs, we clearly have the ability to say one of the units has to be owner occupied. If your question is, if the owner lives somewhere else in Patton Township, can neither unit be owner occupied? I'm going to say you're straying away from really what, I mean, the point, remember, the point is accessory. The point of this whole, why we're having this discussion is that one of the units is an accessory unit, and as an accessory unit, we can put conditions and limitations on it. So, you know, I'm going to say probably not once you give up the issue that one of the units doesn't have to be owner occupied. I think it's really hard to then say the owner's got to live, you know, in some certain geographic location, so.
That's a huge advantage of having an owner occupied. Nicole, proceed. Harder.
The only thing that, to make you think a little further on your wanting to require this as owner occupied, you do have several individuals within the township right now that go to Florida for the winter. So I guess the question is, if you put the stipulation on there, how you give them a grace period to go to Florida, or say, no, you can't have the ADU.
But aren't they still occupied? I mean, I guess I don't understand that one.
Yeah, they're on vacation.
Well, I mean, if somebody leaves, I mean, I think the point of having one of the units owner occupied is that we don't have two rental units. So even if they're not there full-time, I think the issue is not to create two rental units, create one owner occupied unit and one rental unit.
Right?
Correct.
I mean,
Walt,
yeah.
go ahead.
Two things. First of all, you need to be careful with, as Nicole has indicated, depending on how long they stay away from the property. Currently, we require them to have a person in charge, depending on how long they're staying away from the property, for example. So if you're gone for 6 months, we're going to make you designate a person in charge if this is considered a rental unit and gets a rental housing permit. The other piece is currently you require rental housing permits in the township only after 7 days of rental. So you could potentially have the main building be rented for a weekend and this be a rental as well, depending on how you word it and so on.
Well, yeah,
Good point.
I think if we start down talking about short-term rentals, we're going to have we're going to get into a morass we can't solve at all. I just, you know, in terms of short-term rentals, we don't really see a problem in Patton Township as some of the other municipalities may have. That's why we don't have any regulations, because we don't have an issue that we need to regulate at this point.
Yeah, my question the last time, and I will ask it again, is that since we are developing we're looking at developing, requirements for an ADU, can't we incorporate that into, I mean, we obviously state that the purpose of the unit.
Yeah, we could. It's, I mean, if you want to say it can't be used, you want to say it can't be used for, well, if they have a rental housing permit for an accessory dwelling unit, we're, from the township point of view and from the code point of view, we don't care who the tenants are. It's not that we don't care, but we are not verifying that there's tenants there all the time. We're not verifying that the same tenants are there from weekend to weekend. The tenancy is up to the owner. We will verify that they meet the rental housing permit requirements, the zoning permit requirements, but whether...
Well, there are townships in Pennsylvania, because after this one I did do some research that say, you either have to have a short-term rental permit or... We
could have that discussion again. We haven't seen in Patton Township that we haven't seen anybody provide us information or receive complaints that short-term rentals are creating an issue in Patton Township. So I think until we identify a problem we're trying to solve.
Well, but we're creating this.
Well, I think the issue is we're trying to create more dwelling units to serve the affordable housing issue.
Exactly. So by allowing short-term rentals, which is for party weekends, I think that undermines the purpose, so.
It may partially undermine the purpose, but again, you know,
Yeah, but this,
again, if there was an issue if there was a current issue we were trying to fix, we'd probably go down that
But
road.
we're currently trying to fix an issue, so.
No, we're trying to fix the
Okay.
affordable housing issue.
All right, yeah, well,
The-
that's what I meant.
The
sorry.
motivation started by affordable housing. That was the
Exactly.
intent of this. So I think it's worth probably revisiting this. Bill, go
Well,
ahead.
let me before we go down the road, until somebody can come forward and say that there's an exorbitant number of short-term rentals in the township that are creating the affordable housing problem, again, let's identify the problem before we come up with a solution.
And I would echo Doug, we have not had complaints to our side. And my apologies for getting us off into the side there. I just wanted to kind of get the expectation.
Very good.
I think just what I was going to say here is I think my questions and my concerns have been alleviated on making this a owner-occupied requirement. I do like Nicole's statement that that we should, and I do stand, look, owner-occupied has become, I like the idea based on what everybody has said here, and I really like the idea that we're not going to state which, you know, whether the ADU is the small 300 square foot apartment or if it's the 2,400 square foot house.
Right.
So that said, am I correct that everyone is of the opinion that owner occupied is the way to go? Sounds like it is. Am I correct?
Oh,
Yes,
Oh,
here.
yeah, and Barry has a question. Can we go to the podium?
I'll just make a
Go ahead, Barry.
If it's owner occupied, has there been any thought given to what happens when that owner decides to sell the property? Again, from my experience in my neighborhood, houses turn pretty quickly. It's a transition area. What happens when that owner decides they're moving? What happens to that property? How will that then be regulated? That owner then, does he accept the responsibility of what is then under contract with what's in place now?
Well, owner occupied solves that issue. So that would mean that owner occupied, when the property sells, the tenant has to vacate. So it would be the landlord's, it would be their due diligence to terminate that lease. And if they can't terminate the lease, then they can't move. But we're not, we're not quite there yet. Bill, go ahead.
I was going to say, the way that it currently works in Pennsylvania is the landlord is, the second landlord just steps into the shoes of the previous landlord. So the requirement of it being owner occupied, he would not be able to, so you own an ADU, a home with an ADU, I come buy your home with ADU and you move, I would have to move into the ADU, either the ADU or the home, or keep it as it is. And that would depend on what the contracts are. So in reality, it does not change anything, because even if you have even if you have the property sold, you'd have the new owner having to step into the shoes of the previous owner. And they would have to abide by the same laws, same regulations, everything. So they wouldn't be able to buy the house and have it be, oh, I'm buying this as a rental. And I don't even think a corporation could buy the house and have it be as a rental, because it would violate it'd violate the terms of the deal, and then they would be getting sued by the tenant, because what we would probably do is we'd probably sue them and say, hey, look, you can't do this, you have to vacate, or something along those lines.
I think you're right, but I think the common sense thing here is the buyer of the property, if they like the rental income that's now being collected, because home prices are expensive, they may very well not be able to afford the home if they weren't able to collect the 300, I'm just throwing that number out there, pass go every month. So again, I think the concept here is there's a whole lot of advantages to it being owner occupied.
I have a question. So that,
Darren, go ahead.
if you hit, so if it's owner occupied, I think we're all in agreement on that. But I think with these numbers on the little chart on the paperwork here, the next thing down says owner occupied with rental permits. When she would, they were showing like there were 79 out of those 99 units that were surveyed.
Right.
79 did not have rental permits, and only one required a rental permit or had a rental permit. And I think that's something we need to address too, because if it's owner occupied with a rental permit, then the person that's renting the ADU, if it's specified in that rental permit upon sale, it would be, you know, they would have to have specific language in there so that that person, the renter, would know that if the house is sold, they may have, you know, they have so many days to vacate the property once it's listed, or once to protect both the buyer of the property and the person who is currently renting the ADU. So I think we need to address that too, that there needs to be some specific language in a rental permit spelling it out for the person renting.
Hey, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but somebody renting a portion of the property when you go to sell it or being purchased requires a disclosure?
Absolutely, and the seller of that property has to honor the fact that there's a portion of that space that's already being rented out. So by nature of a real estate sale, we can't sell properties that are currently being leased. You have to honor the existing lease that's in place.
But that means there is a lease in place. What about leases that, like these 79 that don't have permits or that don't have rental agreements?
But Sharon, I think it's like anything else. If you choose to go down this road, and assuming the community supports it, I hope they do, assuming that you know, one does have an accessory dwelling unit, they're going to have to you know, be familiar with landlord-tenant law. You know, it's just like any other situation. It won't be any different. And we can't draft that whole law into an ordinance. It's too complicated.
Yeah.
What we can do, though, is make it owner-occupied, and that makes it a whole lot less complicated.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with Brian there. So there's a lot that goes into it, but basically in landlord-tenant law, the buyer has to step into the shoes of the seller. Now, if you're asking about, you know, when there's no lease, the problem is under Pennsylvania law, even when there's no lease, there's a lease and we have a default of what the law states of how the things act. Now, in those cases, it's either a 15-day or a 30-day notice to quit, and then I'll leave it to the rest of the lawyers to figure out at that point. But under the current law, if there's no written lease, there are methods in place and how the court would handle it and how that would be taken care of.
Oh, okay.
Okay, are we ready to move on to the next item of business, which is the quantity?
Quick
Could there
question.
be a limit on ADUs per lot?
Quick question, Brian. And maybe Doug can answer this as well. Do we need to put a motion to say, hey, look, we're going to proceed with this being owner occupied? Do we feel comfortable for that point to say that? Yes, no, maybe so?
I don't think we're doing motions. It's all conversation.
This is
No,
work
okay.
This is
session.
just
All
as staff works
conversational.
through writing the regulations. We're taking your comments, and how we draft the regulations will be based on these discussions. So, yeah, no motions needed.
Okay, so talk about quantity. You know, my common sense would say not more than one per property, and start with that. Again, baby steps. Baby steps.
I agree.
I disagree. I would say no more than 2 in R1 and no more than 1 in R2.
Yeah, but Bill, the reality is this. Most of the parcels are a third of an acre. How are you ever going to put two, if we just apply common sense, there's no way we're going to, for 90% of the township, we can't fit more than one ADU on the lot to begin with because you wouldn't have the setbacks.
So it takes care of itself.
Yeah, so it does
But
take care of
what I'm saying is no more than 2 in residential 1, no more than 1 in residential 2.
I just like 1 because this is a complicated subject, and the more moving parts we make, the more complicated it is. So if you want to draft an ordinance like that, now we've got to deal with all the what-ifs for parking. So now I'm saying baby steps, keep it simple, 1 per lot, and then we can have a chronological conversation about how do we deal with parking and the other moving parts.
And
We're going to get so many moving parts in this. We are having trouble grasping our hands around this, but we're going to need to portray this. This needs to be, the public needs to understand it. Keep it simple is my advice. 1
And
per
I really
lot.
do strongly believe that we are one and done, that what we get now is going to be what we
Great.
get ever.
But if you can't even understand it, no one's getting anything.
How are you unable to understand that residential 1 zoning would be limited
Most
to 2?
people don't understand setbacks.
Well, Bill, for clarity, what you say when you say residential 1 might mean something else to somebody else in this,
Yeah, I don't know
on
what
this.
it means.
For-
Sorry.
So I was under the understanding that we're just doing this for R2s.
Well,
We haven't decided
that's
that.
those are all questions that need to be determined. There are probably 6 or 7 different zoning designations in Patton Township that permit single-family homes. So,
This community has.
so I mean,
this-
why don't we ask questions, and that'll help us define what the options are. So, when you
Okay.
say R1, Bill, what are you using as your definition of R1?
Okay, so for example, the homes that are on lots that are larger than 1 acre, I think most of those fall into the R1 category, am I correct?
Some of those are in well, yeah, we have a zoning designation called R1 that typically has lots larger than 1 acre. We also have a lot of homes on large lots that are in the agricultural, the A1 zone. So typically, anything that doesn't have public sewer is going to be on a lot that's 1 acre or larger. Anything with public sewers typically can be on smaller lots. We have, I'm trying to think, people can help me. So in terms of lot size, you go A1, R1 are the 1 acre lots and bigger. R2 is a quarter or 10,000 square feet, roughly a quarter acre. The area behind the movie theater is a combination of a couple different zoning districts that have lots that are smaller, down to 6,000 or 7,000 square feet, some places even a little smaller. We have single-family units in planned communities, Oakwood, toft trees, and they will be on lots that will vary anywhere from 5,000 square feet up to maybe an acre. And then there's.
Bill, I think.
Why don't we ask questions first? If you have questions about what is what, then we can talk about that. So I think so we can talk about a couple different things. Does you want this to cover all single-family residential units? So maybe when we talk about, let's talk about single-family residential units now, so we can say it could apply to all single-family residential units, as long as they meet all the other criteria we've talked about.
Well, what are the
Or
other
they can say
differences between R1 and R2?
Pardon?
What are the other differences between R1 and R2? as far
Minimum
as-
lot size, basically. So all the differences in residential districts primarily have to do with minimum lot size.
Okay.
So R1, A1 are going to be, typically going to be 1 acre or larger. There's some exceptions. R2, which is typically Park Forest and Woody Crest and some other areas, 10,000 square feet, quarter acre. And then you get into the other districts and they're all smaller. So going down to as small as 1/8 of an acre in some circumstances, so.
Here's my
And remember when we
concern.
talk about ADUs, they could be in, could be in part of a building that's already there too, so. It's not a matter of always adding on or doing something different to a building, may or may not. So almost, you could turn you could put an ADU in any, you might as well assume, as long as it's owner occupied, meets all the other conditions that we're gonna have, that you could have an ADU in every single family, if we permitted it, could have an ADU in every single family residential unit in Patton Township, unless we put other conditions on it, so. So, I mean, are there questions around, other questions that you have about, we could do it by zoning districts, could just do the R2 district, we can bring back information, show you where all the R2 districts are. Could do it, combination of things, but those are all options that are on the table.
Do we have the zoning district maps currently available to us, easily accessible?
The map that was in last month's attachment, I never saw, I didn't see agriculture in there. It was like,
If you look at, people in the room, if you look at the map behind you, can somebody find the zoning map? Should be on, I mean, it's,
If I do it, I have to.
yeah, it's,
I was looking at that and I didn't see agriculture.
well, it's called rural, and it's designated A1. It used to be called ag, but we changed the name.
Okay.
So, when you see the names of zoning districts, don't necessarily assume that the name of the district tells you more than what color it is on that map, okay?
Thank you. I know I was really studying it.
Hey, it took me a while to figure out, the 524 box means that it's a has a hydrant in it versus the 523 box means that it's got no hydrant.
It even shows up, so it shows up yellow in this map for the A1 district. Well, that's a different map even, Alex.
Yeah, this is the new map on the
That's
screen. That's the old map.
Okay.
That's fantastic.
We'll have
Which
to
one's
do-
which?
A1, rural district? Maybe?
So, we all have access to that map.
Me too. But I didn't understand it, so.
Yeah, so, I mean,
It's, oh, yeah, because this is all part of.
Well, I'm thinking, farmhand, and mother-in-law suite on an ag property, as two separate ADUs would be fine versus, since Park Forest gets brought up all the time, I don't think, two ADUs should be in Park Forest on any lot there. And I think we need to figure out how we define that ahead of time.
I think that the success of this concept is much more likely if things are kept on the simpler side. And I'm of that opinion because a few years ago, there were just a lot of misinformation that was put out there that was just completely incorrect. And I know that Jim, you and a lot of people have spent a lot of time in this. So I want to be able to have things that the community can understand and support. So that's why I am of the opinion that one per parcel, it's already what's going to happen, even if we were to all come to a consensus on that, it's still really tricky because as you said, Bill, Park Forest is so small, the lots are about 1/3 of an acre. So by the time you actually, it's going to be very difficult to put any of these accessory dwelling units in Park Forest because of the setbacks. And no, that's not true. That's if it were on the outside. If it's inside, then that's not a problem. So when I started the meeting here, when we started a bit ago, we talked about inside the dwelling or outside, and that's a conversation that we haven't really figured out. But if we were to figure that out, that would help answer how many could even be on a parcel. So I think we have two questions at hand. One is, are we talking about accessory dwelling units within the building, within the house envelope? If that's the case, then, you know, whether there are one or two, maybe it's not quite as important. If we're talking about accessory dwelling units that are outside the building envelope, now we have to talk about setbacks and everything else, which in that scenario, many of the lots in the township, like Park Forest, would not be eligible. Do we want to have that conversation? Nicole, you've got a comment. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so what we could do for the next meeting is make sure that we're going to talk about the configuration. And by that, I mean, is it attached, is it detached, is it interior? We could talk about the eligibility or the where, which we were going to talk about tonight. We kind of started to delve into that with this conversation, and the quantity. So we can kind of roll those together. So if it makes more sense that if you want to talk about those things at the same point in time, because they're all pretty well related, then I can bring you back more information from May that that's the structure of our conversation will be around those three key things and whatever else on our master list from the outline and whatever. But you get what I'm saying? Like, if you don't want.
I completely get what you're saying. Yeah, and just so I don't want the community to start, I don't want a lot of misconceptions going on. So the reality is that in Park Forest, the lots are all 1/3 of an acre, and it's going to be really hard to put another structure outside the building envelope and adhere to the current setbacks.
Well, I mean, and that's kind of limiting in and of itself then. If they can't adhere to setbacks, then they won't be able to do it.
Right, but people don't know the setbacks, so they, go ahead, Jim.
Well, we should consider all, whether it's exterior, attached, detached, or interior. Because some lots are bigger than the 1/3 of an acre in Park Forest.
I agree.
Not all by a long shot, but way back when, that's why we came up with the number of 18,000 square foot lots.
Correct.
Not less.
Yeah, like on North Oak Lane, Douglas, there's some big yards.
It also depends on the size of a house that's already on a lot. There's some big houses on a lot, there's small houses on a lot. So that varies. But I think we should keep it open to consider all three.
I have an opinion.
Go ahead, Sharon.
I don't think we should allow anything outside the envelope of the house, because you've got neighbors, people who have invested their money in those properties on either side or on the back of those properties, and I don't think that they should have to. I think everything needs to be done within the envelope of the house. If somebody wants to make a rental unit available, whether it's out of their basement or out of a portion of the side of their house, I think that's fine. But you have not only the aesthetics of everything that the neighbors deserve to have status quo, the way they bought into the neighborhood and have invested their money in that neighborhood, but I also think that then you start getting into easements and people applying for, what do you call them, variants or, for the sides and the backs of the property, how far they can build or how high up over a garage or something like that. And I just don't think that's fair to the rest of the neighborhood.
Well, I think that we have to be realistic with what we're trying to accomplish. And so if obviously we want the community to support this. We want to have a solution for affordable housing. So I think our asks need to be reasonable, or I think it's going to be dead in the water.
I think if we limit it to 1 unit per owner occupied, and it has to be within the boundaries of the existing home, then I think that takes care of all of those issues. Because then you still have parking and those other things that have to be addressed.
Correct. Gentleman at the podium, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Barry Feinberg again. Thank you, Ms. Collins. You just hit the nail right on the head. In order to be able to sell this, Mr. Barnett, you need to get residents buy-in. Your concept of expanding and getting as much as you can on the first go-around is going to make it a hell of a lot harder to sell it to people like me as compared to Ms. Collins and Mr. Ratter. And that's just from a resident's point of view. And I promise you, I will rally the troops. Thank you.
Thank you for your input.
And what I would say is approaching this from a numbers standpoint. There are more places than just Park Forest. There are more property owners than just the Park Forest property owners. There are lots that are bigger. In fact, the people from Park Forest were so upset that we weren't going after the people in the big lots when, a long time ago. So what I'm saying is we need to approach this not as Park Forest being the only people that are handling this planning committee. We need to do this for all of Patton Township. We need to approach this as all of Patton Township, not just Park Forest. It makes me very angry when we cater to one group instead of looking at everything, looking at the acreage. And I really, really resent the threat of I'm going to kill this with my people from Park Forest. This needs to be approached by a numbers game to make things work for everybody in the community, not just Park Forest.
Well,
Point taken.
I don't think it is just talking about Park Forest. I don't live in Park Forest. I have a much bigger lot out, and the lots are bigger out in my neighborhood. But we also have invested our money in a particular neighborhood with a particular look to it, and we want the aesthetics to stay the same. I mean, I think that's going to be the same as with anybody in any neighborhood that they can afford and that they've moved into and then they've invested in. They want to be able to get their money back out, when the time comes, and they want it to look a certain way while they're still living there. And so that's why I think if it stays within the boundaries of that house, there's a limit, that takes care of that. An owner occupied, one renter within the boundaries of that house. And
Thank you,
then you
Sharon.
don't have
Jim?
any of those other issues.
Jim, I'm going to go to you. Go ahead, Jim.
We can designate as far as the looks of whatever is added on has to match into the neighborhood. And there's also, that's why there's setbacks. And the setbacks are sufficient enough that you aren't right on top of somebody else. So,
Well, you can regulate that, but then how do you enforce that?
Well, that's.
We have the means to do that.
Are enforced all the time.
Next up is Nicole Harder. Go ahead, Nicole.
Doug, would it help if we, between either Alex, myself, or Nicole Pollock, create a chart and go through the zoning districts to list down what the minimum lot size needs to be, what the setbacks are, percentage of maximum coverage? Would it help the planning commission to have a detailed chart that we could do a comparison so they could possibly narrow it down?
yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely, Nicole. I think that's a great suggestion, and I think that for the community to even begin to understand it, they're going to need to see that. So I think that's great advice. Great suggestion. Okay. I feel like we have some sort of, Nicole Pollock, I think we have an idea for next meeting, the things that we need to really talk further on. It's 6 o'clock. I think that we beat this enough for one evening. I do want to say, though, I think we have a pretty good representation here of areas of Patton Township, just knowing where everybody is. And Bill, we often do hear about Park Forest, and it's just because it's the gorilla in the room. It just is what it is. It's like us talking about State College and not mentioning Penn State. Go ahead, Doug.
I just say, as people think about this over the next couple of weeks, if you have questions about you know, what other setbacks wherever, or you have specific questions that you want more information on, why don't you reach out to Nicole Pollock before the meeting and we can start collecting some of that information. We had talked on staff earlier today about maybe creating an FAQ, a running FAQ that goes along with this. So, you know, we'll get these answers questions and we'll have these FAQ that'll go along with all the agendas from here, and, you know, as long as we keep discussing this. So, like I said, if you have questions, you know, that you're not sure how the, you know, what's permitted here, what's permitted there, what are the setbacks in Park Forest, what are the setbacks in, you know, your neighborhood if you're not in Park Forest, and we can, you know, we can get that information out to you before we get to the next meeting next in whatever the May.
So who should we send those to?
Pardon? Start with Nicole Pollock,
Okay.
and then she'll disperse them as needed to Nicole Harder or Alex or me, and if, you know, if she needs help on finding the answers, so.
And should we discuss parking also next week or next time that we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're just not
Put that
there
on the
yet.
list.
Yeah.
And then,
All right, any other business other than this? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
no motions.
I motion we
agree.
adjourn.
I second.
No, agree.
All in favor, say aye.
I,
See
Thank you
y'all.
all.
okay.